Wuthering Heights by Sylvia Plath. The horizons ring me like faggots, tilted and disparate and always unstable. Touched by a match, they might warm me, and their fine lines singe the air to orange. Before the distances, they pin evaporate, weighting the pale sky with the solider color. But they only dissolve and dissolve like a series of promises as I step forward.
There's no life higher than the grass tops or the hearts of sheep, and the wind forced by like destiny, bending everything in one direction. I can feel it trying to funnel my heat away. If I pay the roots of the heather too close attention, they will invite me to widen my bones among them.
The sheep know where they are, browsing in their dirty wool clouds, gray as the weather. The black thoughts of their pupils take me in. It is like being mailed into space, a thin, silly message. They stand about in grandmother disguise, all weird curls and yellow teeth, and hard, marbly bodies.
I come to wheel ruts and water limpid as the solitudes that flee through my fingers. Hollow doorsteps go from grass to grass. Lintel and sill have unhinged themselves. Of people the air only remembers a few odd syllables. It rehearses them moaningly. Black stone, black stone.
The sky leans on me, the one upright, among all horizontals. The grass is beating its head distractedly. It is too delicate. For a life in such company, darkness terrifies it. Now, in valleys narrow and black as purses, the house lights gleam like small change.
The basic sense of Wuthering Heights is best understood in stanzas because of the distant diversity between each successive stanza. In stanza 1, the speaker describes how he or she feels about the horizon and how it affects them. The speaker is ringed or surrounded by the horizon, and it warms or singes the speaker. The horizon places a series of promises on the speaker, but the promises dissolve as the speaker is forced to step forward into them. In stanza 2, there is no life higher than the grass tops, and the wind is blowing on everything moving it in one direction. The grass, the sheep, the flowers, and the speaker are subject to the wind. The speaker is specifically having his/her heat being taken away from them by the wind. In stanza 3, the sheep understand who they are and are as gray as the wither. The speaker gets a message from the sheep when looking into their eyes. The sheep look as if they are concealing their identity with their wig curls and yellow teeth, which is synonymous to that of a grandmother. In stanza 4, a depression or groove worn into a road or path is full of clear water being compared to the aloneness of solitude. This water escapes the speaker's fingers. The house has empty doorsteps that go from grass to grass, and there is a window in the house whose lintel and sill have become unhinged and separated. This allows air to hit people's faces, which makes the people moan of black stone. And finally, in stanza 5, the sky is pressed against the speaker with maximum contact. The grass is swaying with the wind and does not feel the weight of the pressure of the sky. When life is in the company of grass, darkness will terrify life and force one to change. The speaker seems to be at war with nature, which is in vain as the speaker loses. The speaker becomes depressed, and this is evident in her use of sad, unhappy, miserable, and hopeless language as the poem goes from stanza to stanza. The speaker is unable to get support and feels her morale draining away from her beliefs, as evident when the speaker states that there is a limpid water fleeing through his or her fingers. The entire poem describes the speaker going against nature, but this is simply a large and complex metaphor which depicts the pressure placed on the speaker to conform to society. Wuthering Heights was made by Sylvia Plath in 1961, a time in which women were still fighting to get greater equal rights and rise above traditional domestic roles. The narrator describes her fight for independence through the poem, and this is most noticeable in the scenes with the hypnotic sheep that resemble grandmothers and the sky and wind representing society, which is pressed against the speaker while the wind takes the speaker's heat, representing morale, away from her. The people who conform to society, described as grass in the poem, sway with the wind without problems from the sky or wind. The poem evokes feelings of depression, solitude, and loss because we as readers want the speaker to achieve joy and happiness, but reoccurring negative words and the speaker losing her battle in achieving individuality in the last three lines of the poem solidifies the feelings of depression, solitude, and loss.
Death is manifest in Plath's poems in many ways. For instance, suicide is part of death in her poems. Victimization. Plath felt like a victim to men in her life, like her father and husband who were male-dominant. In nature, Plath uses images and illusions like sea and fields. The sea in most occasions represents her father as powerful. She expresses how she felt about motherhood and her body. The poem Old Lady's Home and Wuthering Heights both contain the subject of death. The speaker doesn't fear death, it sounds a welcoming to death. In Old Lady's Home, death is represented as a person. However, in Wuthering Heights, death is represented by nature. The poem Spinster on line 3 with her latest suitor, and the poem Wuthering Heights on line 2 tilted and desperate and always unstable, showing stability. The both poems contain 5 stanzas. Both mention a plant. On Spinster line 10 through a rank wilderness of fern and flower, and the poem Wuthering Heights on line 16 through 17. If I pay the roots of the heather too close attention, they will invite me. They both show an attachment to the plant as if that's where they belong.
One of the highlights of Sylvia Plath's poem, Wuthering Heights, is sheep. Throughout the poem, Plath makes quite a few references to the sheep, such as in the second and third stanza. In the second stanza, Plath writes, "There is no life higher than the grass tops or the hearts of sheep." This part of the second stanza sort of insinuates that the sheep are just beings with no life and that they only contain a heart. The third stanza is mostly about sheep, and the lines in the stanza that say, "The sheep know where they are, browsing their dirty wool clouds, gray as the weather," could be a comment on people, as in they don't like the idea of death or mortality. The line that says, "The black spots of their pupils take me in," are in a way threatening images to the speaker, and it helps to show that she is at war with nature. She proceeds to write, "It is like being mailed into space, a thin, silly message." These lines add to one of the themes of loneliness, as space is a lonely place, and this simile shows how she is feeling insignificant in the midst of all of her surroundings. The speaker is suggesting that the sheep aren't taking their surroundings in general, and they're almost criticizing her. She's longing for an escape, but the sheep are a silly way to try to find an escape from how she's feeling. This adds to the tone of desperation that is seen throughout the poem, Wuthering Heights.
Highlight number 2 is about the illusion in Wuthering Heights. The title has an allusion to a book called Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronnett. And this book has the main character, his name is Catherine. And Catherine and Sylvia Plath have a few connections. So within the book, Catherine attempts suicide, and so does Plath. And within the poem Wuthering Heights, death is mentioned quite often, and it is a huge tone within the poem. And also, they're both strongly connected to the nature around them. As you can see within the poem, Plath mentions and describes nature and uses nature as part of her metaphors and symbols, and that also connects to Catherine in Wuthering Heights in the book.
Wuthering Heights is nature. There's a lot of nature imagery throughout the entire poem. Stanza 1 mentions horizons and sunsets. Stanza 2 talks about grass tops, sheep, and wind. Stanza 4 has water, and more grass is mentioned in the last stanza along with valleys. The nature in Wuthering Heights could be symbolic. The speaker in the poem seems to be battling the elements. It could be representing real struggles in the speaker's life. And nature surrounding the speaker in the poem is actually the obstacles of life surrounding the speaker in the real world.
So the tone throughout the poem is depressing and reflective. It's depressing in the sense that the poem talks a lot about death and has a lot of similes towards death. For example, in line 13, when the speaker says everything in one direction alludes to death because it's talking about how the wind moves everything in one direction, which is death and the future for everything. And the poem is also can be seen as reflective because the speaker is reflecting on life, such as when she evaluates her surroundings, when she sees a sheep and starts thinking about life and death and all the other parts of nature.